So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we're debating a very interesting compendium of legislation today dealing with the legalization of medical marijuana. And, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as a member for Parliament in the constituency of St. Anne's, and having lived my life in the Johnson Road, Fox Hill community, I know that there's a significant number of my constituents that reside not just in the Johnson Road, Step Street area, but within the Blair community, within the Winton community, within the High Vista, Mount Vernon communities that have at one time, if not still to this day, indulged, Mr. Deputy Speaker, whether for medicinal or recreational purposes in the consumption of marijuana. I've done so myself at times, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I know other members of the House of Parliament have acknowledged that in their own right or within the House. So addressing the legalization of marijuana, in my opinion, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is long overdue, and that is what we're doing to date. I appreciate that a concern for some citizens is that the reality of marijuana and the legalization of medicinal marijuana is that once you go down that road, there's no coming back from that, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And that's as clear as when you get a joint, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and you light it. Once that smoke comes out the joint, Mr. Deputy Speaker, you can't put the smoke back into the joint. And what we're doing right now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is we're taking that smoke out of the joint, and we're not going to be able to put it back. Now, this bill, this compendium of legislation, makes a valiant effort, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and it's a good starting point to manage how you can balance the interests of those persons that wish to receive medicinal marijuana against those persons that would prefer not to have their life disrupted by it, whether it's through the odor that emanates from it, Mr. Deputy Speaker, or the way it impacts their places of employment, the way it may impact negatively some members of their households. So when we're looking at this legislation, I'd like to raise a couple of issues I think that are important. And on the decriminalization side, which right now isn't really decriminalization, it's a get out of jail free card type of step, because if you don't partake in paying the fine, the fixed penalty fine, you'll actually still face a summary trial for a summary conviction, or a trial after an information is brought against you, which comes with more severe penalties. And that doesn't even deal with those persons that are trafficking in marijuana. So with the decriminalization, you have a scenario where we've legalized the demand, or we're saying we're legalizing the demand up to a reasonable amount, 1 ounce, 30 grams of marijuana, which is a significant size for personal consumption, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But if you go beyond the 1 ounce, you're not able to receive that fixed penalty fine, and if you're found with it, you'll either be tried summarily or you'll be tried by way of information, to the same types of sentences that you're looking at now. If we are going to decriminalize it, then we should allow anybody that's buying it, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and in my opinion, if you can decriminalize the consumption, the person purchasing off the black market, Mr. Deputy Speaker, you should look at how you're going to decriminalize the sale in the black market. Now, we appreciate now that we have a market that persons are purchasing that marijuana, and it's not just the weed that's full of seeds that comes in the foil wrappers, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Honourable Member, I'm going to ask the members to silence their phones, please. Thank you.
It's no longer just the weed that comes in the foil wrappers that's full of seed, Mr. Deputy Speaker. You got some people selling some high grade in the country. You got a market where there's gummies already existing in the country, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I'm sure you got the people that use the vape devices that are putting whatever the capsule is inside those vape devices and consuming those. And you're not going to find, just like most illegal businesses, once they're legalized, that the illegal aspect of it goes away. The illegal aspect of it is going to remain there for persons that can't participate in the legal side of it. So if we want to do something, we should look at expanding in time. Like I said, the fire has already been lit, the smoke's out. We're going down the road, in my opinion, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to the legalization of recreational marijuana as well. But it's surprising that we are going to decriminalize up to 30 grams, up to an ounce, but still make the persons that are in possession of it for the purposes of sale pay a fine. And what I found from my review of the legislation is that if you buy cannabis, 30 ounces or less, and that's quite a few joints, 30 ounces or less, and you get caught with it, then the police are going to give you a fixed penalty ticket, which, much like a traffic ticket now, tells you which magistrate's court to go to pay the amount that they put on the ticket. And if you don't, or if you're disputing that you actually were in possession of that quantity of cannabis, you go to court and you go through the trial process. So you can be found in possession of 30 ounces for personal use and receive that ticket. The act isn't clear if your ounce will be confiscated, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And it's not clear, it seems to me, to say that if you're actually in the business of selling marijuana, Mr. Deputy Speaker, not with one of the licenses under the Act, but in the same market that exists now. If you're in possession of marijuana for sale, and you're only in possession of 30 ounces, so the guys that are out on the street, you know, there's an abandoned vehicle somewhere, there's a tin can, there's some object which identifies where their stash is located. So long as they keep that stash, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to 30 ounces or less, and they're only found to be in possession of it, despite the police being able to presume that their purpose is to sell it, so long as they're not caught in the act of a sale, they too, if it's 30 ounces or less, are entitled to receive the fixed ticket under this legislation. If, however, by this legislation, they're found not only to be in possession of 30 ounces or less, but in the act of selling the marijuana, then they face much serious fines and potential custodial sentences. So I'll touch on that as I continue, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I'll touch on use for religious purposes. But it was brought up by my colleagues earlier, and this issue of no conviction. And I know we didn't initially get a response, and we might have had Cat Island, Rumpke, and San Salvador give a response after looking at Freetown, to the effect that someone whose record has been expunged would be able to apply for a license for the handling of cannabis. But Section 18, eligibility to apply for a license, subsection 2, or 18.2 reads, no person convicted of an offense under the Dangerous Drugs Act, the Proceeds of Crime Act, the Criminal Justice International Cooperation Act, or this act shall be eligible to apply for a license under this section. So somebody that's had their record expunged means that they no longer have a criminal record. So if they've been convicted of an offense and either the time has passed or they've applied and they've gotten their record expunged and they no longer have a criminal record, they've still been convicted of an offense. They've still been convicted potentially of an offense under the Dangerous Drugs Act, Proceeds of Crime Act, Criminal Justice Act, or this act. It's just that it's no longer on their record. I think a better reading of this legislation, if it was amended, would read that 18.2, a person with no criminal record of an offense under the Dangerous Drug Act is someone that can apply. So for me to have a criminal record with no offenses on it, that's one thing. That's what I would have after my convictions have been expunged. But for the law to be set up and to pass through here brings uncertainty as it is if it still reads that no person convicted in an offense can apply. So I would like there to be some consideration to that so that the preferred language of a person with no criminal record can apply, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Now, something that's interesting, I've already given an indication based on my interpretation of this legislation as to who can basically buy marijuana for recreational purposes and what the results will be if they keep it to 30 grams an ounce or less. And that is a fixed penalty when you're finally caught of $250. Initially, I thought it'd be great if you wanted to participate in recreational marijuana and you don't have a medical card permitting you to buy it from a pharmacy or a dispensary. I thought it'd be great. You go buy your marijuana, you roll up to the police station, you let them know you got it, you pay your fixed penalty, you go home and you smoke your weed for your birthday or with your family or with your girlfriend, whatever the situation may be. But without this legislation being clear as to the confiscation, I realized that if you did do that, you went and bought your marijuana as a good law-abiding citizen, knowing that you had a fixed penalty because this administration's decriminalized it, and you go to the police station, let them know you got your ounce or less, you pay your $250 fixed penalty fine, and you go home knowing that you have no reason to look further over your shoulder. That's one way that persons can do it, but as I said, you're going to risk one, having your cannabis confiscated, and two, you're going to risk potentially having to answer the issue of answer the issue with an employer. Have you ever been given a fixed penalty or paid a fixed penalty for marijuana? So while we're decriminalizing it here, you're going to still find employers that will get your police arrest record, not just your police record, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and they'll look to see what you might have been arrested for. And if you're not honest and upfront with them as to what you've been arrested for, you can be terminated. The law may decriminalize it by giving you a $250 fine, but if you go to an employer and employers doesn't have the same approach or the same appreciation of cannabis that you do, and you end up telling them that you've paid a fixed penalty for cannabis before, they say, well, I don't want to take the risk. I don't think that I need to have someone smoking cannabis, whether they do it at home or elsewhere, working for me. So my recommendation is if you buy your cannabis under an ounce, you go home. If they ever catch you with it, then you pay your $250 fine there, but you still run the risk of being arrested and having your marijuana confiscated. Another way, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and we all remember the song from Morgan Heritage, you don't have to be dread to be Rasta, no. This is not the dreadlock sting, divine conception of the heart. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, another way like Morgan Heritage told us, is that you don't have to be dread to be Rasta, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's a belief in your heart. Now that goes beyond simply having a interest in consuming cannabis, Mr. Deputy Speaker, but knowing a bit about Robert Nesta Marley and the Line of Solomon and everything else that comes along with it, Emperor Selassie and the faith that started in the 30s in Jamaica. But by Section 49, religious use, we talked about the religious organizations. So a religious organization can use it and administer it in the place of worship after they apply to the authority for a religious organization's license to distribute cannabis to members for use as a sacrament in an assembly of or an association with other Rastafarians in a place of worship in accordance with the provisions of this act. So that once that license issued, that's really given upon the Rastafarian community, that religious organization, to determine how and when they're properly protecting their members from the unnecessary harassment by police if they individually as members are seen in some way to be found in possession of marijuana. But you can also apply, Mr. Deputy Speaker, without having an association with a religious organization, Rastafarian religious organization, is an individual who doesn't, for instance, attend church by Section 49(2). A person of the Rastafarian faith who is not affiliated with an organization of the Rastafarian faith or a place of worship of the Rastafarian faith may apply to the authority for a religious use license to possess and consume cannabis for use as a religious sacrament in a secured area in a private residence. So basically, Mr. Deputy Speaker, what this section is telling me is that if in your heart you're a Rastafarian, you're a Rasta, and you don't attend the church, Mr. Deputy Speaker, you don't assemble with any Rastafarian organization, once you know to yourself that you're a Rasta without dreads or with dreads, you can apply, Mr. Deputy Speaker, also for a license to possess and consume cannabis. That's the way the section is now. So for my constituents that are interested in participating in the consumption of marijuana, you can do it also within your own home if you are of the Rastafarian faith, and you'll get your own license to smoke it in your own home. And you also have, as I said before, you'll be able to buy it on the existing markets so long as it's under 30 grams. And if you're caught, you pay a $250 fine. So it's important. It's important, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for every community member to know, especially the young men, the women, that if you're in possession for your personal use of 30 ounces or less and the police approach you, and that's the only thing you got on you, don't panic anymore. $250 isn't worth panicking over, because what used to happen is when people were afraid of the police, when they would be in possession of 30 grams or less, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as you see the police coming, you know trouble's coming, because they're going to take you into custody, they're going to lock you up, they're going to take you away from your family, they're going to take you into custody maybe for the weekend. You might get police bail, you may not get police bail. You got to go before the court, you got to call family members to come help you out, because you know it's highly likely, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that you're going to need to pay a fine at the very least. Even if it's your first offense, just the likelihood, the risk, the fear of that exists now. But you don't have to once this legislation passes. If you're in under an ounce and it's just for your personal use, just hail the police back and go through the process with them, get your ticket, pay your $250. And it's a minimum, I think, of a week, might be 2 weeks you got to pay within, put that money together and go back home. If they confiscate your weed, confiscate your weed. If the law isn't clear, talk to your MP. He'll find out from the Ministry of Health whether you should be able to keep your weed after you pay your $250 fixed penalty. But you don't have to run anymore, Mr. Deputy Speaker. You run from the police. We all have heard situations of where things have happened. Very early on, when I was working with Freetown at Lockhart and Monroe, I was dealing with a coroner's inquest, and there was a young man, a little bit older than me at the time. I was probably about 23 then. He ran from the police when the police approached him off of Kemp Road. And in fleeing from the police, he ran around the building. One cop gave chase. The other cop stayed basically by the vehicle in the front of the building. And there was a gunshot that occurred during the pursuit around the back of the building. And as the gentleman that was fleeing the police came back out into visibility of the first officer, he fired off his gun, and the man was fatally shot. And what had transpired that entire time is that shot that police officer heard was actually seen to have been a shot that his partner fired off. So I think some foil might have been found on the scene. It might have been an issue where the color of the foil resembled that of a firearm. But that was a time when what would have been simple possession resulted in the death of of a young man. And it was because in these moments of panic, we can create more problems. No good medical practitioner, no good surgeon, I think, panics easily, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And for the young men in the Bahamas, young women in possession for personal use of less than 30 grams, they don't need to panic anymore once this legislation passes. $250 is not worth losing your life. So that also identifies that you can be harassed in your own home, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and receive a religious license for your own consumption. There is an issue, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in my opinion, with the law as it relates to use of cannabis in public areas. So smoking cannabis, Section 61. This is where the legislation is trying to balance the interests of those that wish to partake in cannabis for medical reasons. And you've heard some of the medical reasons, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The list already right now is quite lengthy. I'm sure it'll grow. You got it for chemo, chronic pain, MS, AIDS, epilepsy, PTSD, glaucoma, Crohn's, depression, ALS. I don't know how depression is going to be diagnosed. I know times are tough right now, so there probably are a lot of Bahamian households where at least one person might be seen as qualifying as depressive personality and can get a license for it, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But the fact that you have a license, when you go to New York, I went to New York City, and you can't walk down a corner on the main strip in New York City without smelling weed coming basically around every corner. So this, I think, part of the legislation tries to attempt to ask for good faith by persons with medical use approvals to not smoke in front of other people. 7 o'clock.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, it's our intent to try and wrap up the debate on this compendium tonight. So I would move that this House sits beyond 7 p.m.
Is there a seconder? It has been moved and seconded that the business of the House do continue past 7 p.m. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The motion is carried. The business of the House will continue beyond the 7 p.m. hour. As many, the chair recognizes the honourable member for St. Anne's.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So Section 61 regulates the when and where persons with medical marijuana licenses and even religious cannabis licenses can smoke. So by Section 61, and there's a suggested amendment in this Section 61.1. 61.1 reads, subject to subsection 2 and 3, a person authorized by this act to possess, use, or consume cannabis shall not do so in a public place, workplace, or conveyance, nor within a 6-foot radius of the entrance, exit, window, door, or other ventilation source of a public place, workplace, or conveyance. So you have a situation where I can understand the use and or consume cannabis. I can understand that part, but the possesses part, I think, is what needs to be changed, because you're talking about individuals that are in a conveyance. Now, conveyance, I know what a conveyance is. It's basically an instrument that transports or that moves something. We deal with conveyances in land. That's generally where the public will be familiar with the word conveyance. But by the act, what they're talking about is, by the definition, conveyance means any form or mode of transportation which carries passengers. So as 61.1 presently is written, it will make it an offense for you to possess cannabis, even if you have a medical card in a vehicle, in your vehicle even. So if the police pull you over and they find that you've come from the pharmacy or the dispensary with your legal purchase in your pocket, that is an offense. And it's a pretty serious offense, because unlike being in possession, Mr. Deputy Speaker, of 1 ounce off the existing market and paying a fixed penalty of $250, or unlike being in possession for supply but not supplying of 1 ounce, you get a fixed penalty of $250. But if you're found to possess cannabis, even though you're authorized to possess cannabis in your vehicle, Mr. Deputy Speaker, you can face, on conviction on information, to a fine not exceeding $3,000 or a term of imprisonment not exceeding 1 year, or to both such fine and imprisonment. And then on summary conviction in 61(4)(b), on summary conviction, to a fine not exceeding $1,000 or to a term of imprisonment not exceeding 6 months, or to both such fine and imprisonment. So you can actually get a valid medical license to purchase marijuana, to purchase cannabis for chemo, MS, AIDS, PTSD, either of the permitted illnesses or ailments. And you'll end up paying a more significant fine, facing a more significant penalty with, say, half an ounce of cannabis under a medical card than you would if you bought it off the black market at 1 ounce. Because off the black market at 1 ounce, it's a $250 fixed penalty. But if you have legitimately purchased it from a pharmacy by this legislation as is, and you're driving in your vehicle, your conveyance, then on summary conviction, you're looking at a fine not exceeding $1,000 in a term of 6 months or both, and on conviction by way of information. And this is apparently in the discretion of the police. It's not even a matter of you having a certain quantity that would, so long as you stay under that quantity, you always know you'll be dealing with a summary conviction or a summary offense. It's apparently up to the discretion of the police. Yeah, but you can have one officer. You're going to have officers, I think. The reality is you're going to have officers that aren't even going to check for cannabis anymore. Who's going to want to deal with that headache? It's legalized. It's legalized for person A, but not legalized for person B. And I'm going to spend my night writing up a police report because person B doesn't have a medical marijuana license or medical cannabis license, and person B does. Man, if I smell weed, I'm going to approach you and I say, don't put that weed anywhere around my nose. Go back to where you're supposed to deal with that. I'm going to give you a warning. I think what officers are going to want to deal with trying to figure out which individual has a license, which individual doesn't, is going to want to try to figure out which member of a Rastafarian-based organization comes under that license, and which Rastafarian under a religious faith-based organization doesn't come under that license. Okay? So I think that at the very least, it shouldn't be an offense to take your medical cannabis from the dispensary, from the pharmacy, back to the place where you're legally permitted to consume it, to smoke it. So we need to take the word possess out of the second sentence of section 61(1) and wherever else it appears in that context. And then you have this issue of public place. So what is I mean, well, you also have this issue of a 6 feet radius of the entrance, exit, window, door, or other ventilation source of a public place. Now weed doesn't sit on you. Weed travels. So when you light up marijuana, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that'll go well beyond 6 feet. I could walk into a public place, Mr. Deputy Speaker, having smoked in my private legalized location, and I could make that whole room stink of weed, Mr. Deputy Speaker, when I walk in. Is that covered by this offense as well? It's unclear, but at least I know that I won't be consuming it in that public place. But look at public place, look at the definition of public place, which is found in 61.5, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Public place means, so this is somewhere where even with a medical license, you're not supposed to consume, smoke your weed, smoke your cannabis. Public place means a place which is not a privately occupied residence. Okay, so if it's a privately occupied residence, that's pretty straightforward. That's your home. You can smoke it in your home. That's not a public place. But it also says, or a place which is not used for commercial purposes. So, or a place which is not used for commercial purposes, which to me implies that it's possible to smoke cannabis in a commercial place because it's not a public place. There isn't anything right now by this definition that says a commercial place is a public place. So the public can come into a commercial establishment, but that's my private establishment. I can refuse entrance to anybody. That's my things. But the law doesn't make clear that you can't smoke in a commercial place. Now, one spot where it defines workplace in still section 61.5, it says workplace means any area or place used by persons during their employment, work, or contract for services, and includes A, vehicles used in the course of employment or for work purposes, B, connected, annexed places or common areas to your workplace, and then C, residences used for commercial activities. So this is the only time where I see commercial activities coming into effect, and that's basically a home-based business, but not a larger commercial business. So I think the law as drafted needs to be looked at again in regard to that part. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I think that that's basically enough from me on this contribution. But one final notice that I will give to people is when we're talking about cannabis and the 30 grams, 1 ounce basically, there's a schedule in this bill, the first schedule. So what weighs out to a gram, Mr. Deputy Speaker, doesn't necessarily mean it's a gram, depending on the type of cannabis. So you have, in column 1 of the first schedule, class of cannabis, quantity that is equivalent to 1 gram of dried cannabis, okay? So dried cannabis, which I'm assuming is what you get off the street, not too expensive, is 1 gram. So 1 gram of dried cannabis is 1 gram, and this is important because it relates to the fixed penalty. 2, fresh cannabis. So 1 gram of fresh cannabis is equal to 1 gram of dry cannabis is equal to 5 grams of fresh cannabis. 1 gram of dried cannabis is equal to 15 grams of solids containing cannabis. So foods, I guess. 1 gram of dried cannabis is equal to non-solids containing cannabis up to 70 grams. So a drink, if there's drinks that contain cannabis, 1 gram of cannabis, 1 gram of dried cannabis is the same as 70 grams of cannabis drink, and 1 gram of dried cannabis is the same as a quarter of a gram of cannabis concentrates, and then 1 gram of dried cannabis is equal to 1 seed of cannabis plant seeds. So if you're going to be in possession of marijuana, or you know your kids are going to be in possession of marijuana, make sure you brief them on this legislation, because you can have 30 grams, or you can be using gummies or foods or drinks, and the scale is completely off. Not only do members of the public need to be briefed on this, but I think members of the police force, if they are in fact ever going to put themselves in a difficult position of monitoring this, they'll have to be briefed on this as well. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, with those comments, I'll rest, and thank you again. Thank members of the government side, the past administration, and all of my colleagues for their support today. I'm glad that my contribution went over well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, honorable member. The chair recognizes the honorable member for